Hi, good afternoon. My name is Tricia. I am the next gen pastor at New Story Church. And I guess my story is I never wanted to be a pastor, but I ended up being a pastor. And I ended up being a pastor about 6 months before the pandemic. So my very first pastoral position was the next gen pastor. And it was going great. And then, 6 months, and then none of my kids are coming out to church. So that's kind of the context I was thrown into. But as we were coming out and as my church was getting ready to regather, I was certain that my kids would need some sort of counseling and that my families would be coming and asking, like, my child is suffering with this, or I'm having issues with my kid with this. And I was like, how am I going to help my families? And so I actually did I reached out to Jessica, who happens to be my junior high school friend. I reached out to her because I knew she went to Fuller at MFT. And I said, hey, do you happen to know faith-based therapists that like have their theology straight and I can confidently refer my families to? And so she gave me a list. And then I just cold emailed whoever she gave me the contact for. And Esther happened to be one of them. But then also, once I emailed Esther, she was like, is this Tricia from Youngnuk? And I was like, yes. And then she was like, it's Esther. And I was like, there's 20 million Esther Lees, And so, but once she identified herself, I was like, oh my gosh. And so there was kind of like a relational history there already. So, the moral of the story is like, be nice to everyone you meet at whatever age. You just never know. But yeah, so then we started a dialogue and we started meeting and I was like, oh, okay. Like, I asked all the regular questions, like how much does it cost? What if the family can't afford it? Like, what are the things that are available? Because I had no idea. I just knew nothing. And she's so helpful with resources. And through our dialogue, I was like, what would be great? I was like, could you just come and like talk to my parents? And she was like, yeah. And so, the parents at New Story, not my parents. I meant, my parents as in like my flock, okay? And so she like readily agreed and we met and we talked and it just led to like so many other things that we've collaborated with. So it's just been really great, but that's how this all started.
Esther Lee from Hello Therapy. We're based in Pasadena. It's a team-based clinical practice. And the thing I love about our team is that we actually get to work together. And I feel like it's been always recruited as a team of leaders. Everybody has their ideas and strengths and different gifts. So I've been privileged to be able to work amongst these leaders. Ministry, they've all have had ministry backgrounds. So ministry leaders to begin to envision how to partner with churches and organizations. So I think having been in a team-based practice, that's kind of helped me to begin to envision this and make it happen quicker. But the thing that really stood out for me working with Tricia, and I think we do have like really long relational history. Recently, I found out that my dad and her dad have worked on the eldership together, we're obviously from Youngnuk and parents are both elders, and they've worked and have done ministry for decades. So we have that. There's a relational connection, but also, so there's that trust. But I think having had support around my clinical formation, that's also allowed me to kind of delve into this and partner her more excitedly. And I think another thing that really stood out was really that she was proactive and preventive about how she wanted to do this. Actually, entering this room today, I saw many familiar faces, and I think some of the pastors that I work with here have been pastors that I work with in crisis management, triaging, and doing conflict resolution. And that's often the kind of the cases in which we've been consulted for as clinicians in the past. This was different because she was actually cold calling to figure out how to be better prepared for her community of people. And a couple of points that actually really stood out to me was that she really knew her community, had a huge heart for the families. And I know that many of you do. But many pastors might not know how to get started or how to partner with a clinician to make something happen. So one of the best thing I heard her say is like, okay, I'm gonna ask some stupid questions. And I was like, yeah, like that's where it begins. So she asked a lot of questions, and I just love that she kind of had the foresight to ask those questions so that she could just make those answers available to her people. She was definitely an advocate for both sides. She came and talked with me and Grace and our team, kind of sharing like what her needs are in her community, but also advocated for us and kind of put that relational bridge when we got there. It was a really warm welcome. And when we sat with her community, it really felt like she already had primed them for us to speak into their lives. So yeah, that's kind of the short history of our work together so far. And we do have a parent ed series that we're working on at New Story. And that's been exciting.
Are we doing our whole 12 minutes right here?
Or you can do your 12 minutes.
Right here? Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Roy. I'm a sex addiction therapist in Diamond Bar. I'll start with a brief story of how Wilson and I met. This was maybe like 2016 or so, and I was at a SOLA conference in Brea, California, and they had a bunch of round tables like there are here. And I was sitting, and there was a time to kind of get to know your neighbor and everything. And Wilson was next to me. I'd never met him before. And we're introducing ourselves, and I say, hi, I'm Roy. I'm a sex addiction therapist. And he's like, oh, I'm a sex addict. Really? It's very pleasantly shocking when you have a ministry leader who can be that self-aware and that open, and there's like an instant bond that forms when you're able to scrape away the weird stuff, of pretense and masks. And it's just basically, Pastor Jason was saying earlier about the quote about, less being less Christian and more human. That's kind of what happened instantly as he was sharing that with me. And there was a genuine interest that I could tell from him about the kind of work that I do and how that relates to him. So that was the beginning of a really great friendship.
I'm in 6th grade, and I'm sitting on the living room couch, and I remember my hands were clammy, my heart was beating out of my chest. I picked up the landline, and I called my pastor because I wanted to confess a sin to him. And he asked me what it was when he picked up, and I said, it's the worst thing you could possibly imagine. Did you kill somebody? I said, no. Did you beat someone up? Did you take drugs? And he went down the list, and finally he asked, did you masturbate? And I didn't know what that word meant, but it sounded gross. And I was like, that is what I did. But it felt worse than murder, And he prayed for me. And then we never talked about it at church for 30 years. And my sin continued to spiral into obsessive, compulsive pornography viewing. And the thing that ate away at my soul the most was unaddressed. Sermon after sermon, prayer after prayer. I didn't know what to do with this. I read some of my own material as I went through seminary. And then when I planted Renew Church, I just said, I know there's so many people who struggle with this. The last survey I read from Christianity Today, 98% of men over the last 6 months have viewed, about 50% women. And I thought, God, whatever inch of sobriety you give me, however far you would take me along, I will share my story and invite other men and women to move towards sobriety with me. And so I've been pretty open with my story at Renew, but there wasn't a lot of tracks for us to walk on. A lot of our accountability group was like, did you mess up? Let me pray for you. And then Roy came into my life. And actually Rika as well, who's a love addiction therapist. And we have 20 therapists at our church, but I love you the most. And we partnered in many ways. The one I'll share first is that as I met him, COVID just hit. You know, if you were entrenched in sexual addiction, it just got worse. And we launched a series where Roy led 2 cohorts, one with 20 plus men, one with 20 plus women. And we launched about 15, 20 accountability groups. And we continue to move forward. And then we'd love for you to share other ways we've partnered together.
I knew from my history from talking with people who had very well-intentioned accountability groups that it kind of goes and ends the way that he just described it, where people get together and they say, hey, did you watch porn? Yeah, I did. It's like, all right, we'll pray for you. And just kind of, it's rinse and repeat. So, and I don't blame that because they're trying to do it with earnestness, but not a whole lot of guidance about what actually works. So, so I created a kind of a 90-day challenge of sobriety in video form, where I walk the groups week by week in certain steps that have been clinically shown to be helpful, for people. But I can't duplicate myself by being present with the group, so it's kind of duplicating myself in virtual form, and they can play the video and they can meet on their own time. And so I presented that to Wilson, and he said, I want to be able to use this for the good of the church. And so, like you said, like a lot of groups have been formed because of that. And I just want to say that I think Wilson's transparency and the transparency of the pastoral staff has allowed, it gives permission for the rest of the congregation to say, that's exactly what I'm struggling with. And where can I sign up to actually, get better at this? And so that's been my experience so far at Renew. It's just a robust partnership with a pastor and pastoral staff that not just cares about mental health from a distance, but they speak into it and they breathe life into it, because in many ways, like the shame that was eradicated by the cross really gets manifested in the ways that they kind of talk about real life things with the rest of the congregation. So it's been a tremendous blessing for me. Yeah.
The last piece we'll share briefly will be the culture that some of our work has created at Renew. And I think that for me, when I share vulnerably, it really creates a safe space for the people, because they're like, well, Pastor Wilson shared about his sexual addiction again. Like, I don't need to hide. I got a little drunk. Me and my wife are fighting. I'm late to church. Like, we don't gossip that much because everything is usually under like my stuff. And people get to be like, here's the things I struggle with. So I feel like that safety has expanded through looking at the lead pastor and either leaving the church to find a more holy lead pastor, or sticking around and saying, hey, let's journey through this together and let's make real progress, because the things that we hide go unloved, unforgiven, and unhealed. And sin festers in the darkness, but it's when we put it in front of each other, like it says in 1 John, that we find healing. And then secondly, I get to live in a cohesive way when I come up and preach, because I have that lead pastor title. And if that's in kind of the closet, there's going to be a part of me that says, do they really know who I am? Do they know what I'm struggling with? Or is most of what I put in front of people partial and incongruent? I think as I get to bring both my struggle and weakness and my victories to the community, there's an integrity and honesty that I feel that allows me to stand in front of people to share the word. And I'm so grateful for Roy, other elders and brothers and sisters at my church. My parents go there. 3 out of 5 of my closest friends are there. And they surround me. As I share vulnerably, my dad comes up and he says, Wilson, that took courage and humility. Um, and my wife supports me. And so I just feel like really humbled by this community who's willing to hold my whole story as well.
Thank you. Wow. Hello, my name is Heidi. I'm the executive and creative director at Echo Church. We're two different, two very different hats, left brain, right brain. But I'm very happy to be here and to talk about this very important topic, especially sharing this space with Migum. We actually connected with Migum back in 2015, and it's over, 9 years now. So it's been a long, beautiful journey. At the time when we reached out to Migum, it was because our church was going through a season where a lot of our members were couples that were getting engaged and entering that life stage of marriage and going through our premarital process. And our pastors wanted some more guidance on how to do that. And they just felt like something was missing. We weren't able to cover everything. And so I believe our founding pastor, Pastor Brian, reached out to Migum and wanted to just have a conversation and a dialogue about what can we do as a church and how can we introduce mental health to our couples. That was just like the starting point, and it just kind of grew from there. But it's been since 2015 since we started collaborating with therapists. It wasn't just Migum, I believe Roy too, and Hannah. It's so great to see so many familiar faces here that we have worked with and partnered with. But it was our way as a church to communicate to our people that mental health is not something that is quote unquote secular or something that we need to be in competition with as a church, but really it's so vital and integral in the work of ministry. And so I think you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah. Kind of what Tricia was saying, like it's important to be nice to all the people that you know along the way. So I was actually introduced to Pastor Brian through my friend Unhei, who actually went to school with Pastor Jeanette. So that's how I got connected. And Pastor Brian actually drove all the way up here to Fuller and spent the afternoon with me. And that's pretty unique that a pastor would take up that much time to get to know a therapist. And it was through that conversation that we, I think, mutually discovered we're looking for a partnership. It's not just a one-time thing, but it's a partnership. And so, although it didn't feel like an interview at the time, maybe that's what it was. But soon thereafter, he invited me to do a marriage conference for their folks. And so that December 2015, I believe all the married folks and some not married, we did a full-day marriage conference. And then what that launched was a premarital program. So Pastor Brian, with so many young people getting engaged at the time, I think he realized he doesn't have the time to meet with every couple. I mean, it's probably a typical problem that a lot of pastors have. Excuse me. So what we did was we launched a premarital program. And this is where, churches, I think this is a really great challenge for all of you. They decided to invest 5 sessions of therapy, and the church picked up half the cost. And the couple picked up half the cost. That's a pretty big line item in the budget. But they were so committed. And when I see churches putting a line item in the budget, that's significant. And so they partnered with just a handful of local therapists to do that premarital program. And so we've been doing that since 2016, early 2016. And then the other thing that we did was we did 2017, we did a women's conference. And so it was through the premarital program and the women's conference that I introduced something that my colleague here at Fuller developed, Dr. Terry Hargrave. He developed something called restoration therapy, and it involves pain and peace cycles. And so basically through the premarital programs, the marriage conference, and then the women's conference, basically all of ECHO learned what the pain and peace cycle was. They were able to identify their scripts, their pain, they understand the interpersonal dynamics. And I think it was just genius that Pastor Brian and the staff recognized, oh, we want to embed mental health into the everyday conversations that we have at church. We want everyone to understand what mental health and well-being looks like. Yeah.
That actually inspired us to do a mental health awareness month. So we committed a whole month at our church to talk about it openly on the pulpit. That's pretty rare, I'm gathering, back in 2016. But that was spearheaded by our pastor, Jeanette. We had a panel just like this on stage on Sunday, invited therapists. We asked them questions, and the dialogue just started happening. And that's how the culture was set at ECHO, even back in 2016 until now, where therapy and mental health is just like, is so celebrated at our church. We talk about it very openly and just cheer each other on. We had a mental health team actually at one point, and their responsibility was to update a referral list that we freely shared with our members. It was just a simple PDF we came up with, and they just can download it and contact the people on the list, therapists that we vetted and trusted and wanted to share with our members. And so that was just kind of one of the steps that we took. And they also were invited to provide trainings for our leaders. When you facilitate small groups, a lot of people get really vulnerable and deep. And not all leaders are equipped to handle that situation, especially when they get really deep and vulnerable. So something that the mental health team, I remember doing for our leadership camp, was come and do a short training on how to identify risks for depression or suicide or anxiety. And not that they were equipped to, provide that therapy, but just to identify the signs, to offer help, to bridge that gap from where they're at to get help from a therapist. So it was just great that our church was really advocating for that and pushing for awareness in that way. We don't have that mental health team anymore. It's a good thing because it's just now a regular rhythm within our church, doing spiritual direction and getting therapy. It's truly celebrated. And this is a long time coming, and it's been something we've faithfully been investing in and being very intentional about. But it's because we really partnered with amazing therapists like Migum and Hannah. And even now, one of our staff, Heidi, our liturgist, is working with Hannah to put on more workshops for singles and couples and to really have more enriched marriages in our church. Yeah.
And I want to say more about that partnership. So Heidi Kwan and Hannah Chung, Hannah, who also participates in the premarital program, they spent, so they got together and they said, we need to provide marriage enrichment programs. And rather than doing a one-time thing, and rather than Heidi just saying, okay, Hannah, put something together, that's great, they sat together for months. How many months before the first workshop? It's probably like 5-6 months. Imagine the investment. They met so often just talking about the culture, the philosophy, the posturing, the needs. And then Hannah, did one, and you're going to do several more. So it's a real commitment of like the partnership in training and providing this kind of resource. The other thing is that I think Pastor Brian and the staff, like Pastor Wilson, very, very open from the pulpit about his own mental health illnesses and his own experiences. And so oftentimes when someone from ECHO, reaches out to me and they're like, oh, I heard about you. I said, oh, how'd you hear about me? They're like, well, I was just having lunch with friends and we're all talking about who we're seeing as therapists, who we're all seeing for therapy, and we're getting recommendations. that's a normal conversation at Echo. And so that's the level in which, the conversations around mental health and well-being is just a daily part of what happens in that church. Um, there's one idea that I wanted to suggest, and we haven't done it yet, but we've been kind of talking about it. We've been talking about what it would look like for a therapist to partner with a church and provide once a month group therapy. Once a month group therapy, in a sense, like whether it's the staff, the pastors, all of them, but oftentimes these, Monday staff meetings are run by one of them. And so it actually creates some kind of hierarchy. And so when they're sharing, sometimes the person who's leading doesn't get to share, kind of like being like the small group leader of a Bible study, right? And so what this would do is it would allow a therapist to come in and say, what are your needs? And let the therapist create a safe space where everyone can share. And they can also provide resources for well-being, that it's prescriptive, it's preventative, and it also addresses current needs. So that's something that we've been talking about, but I want to invite you guys to think about that as well.
Thank you to all of you. We're not done yet. Yes, that was awesome. Just for the initial sharing, we're going till 2:30 for this panel. And I know as I ask this next question, this first group will get to share a little more. I know you didn't get to talk as much. I'm thinking about both pastors, ministry leaders, and then therapists. So to the pastors here, ministry leaders, executive director, before meeting and working with a therapist, and then now you sort of have clinicians' expertise kind of infiltrating your ministry. Like, what have you learned or gained in the partnership from a ministerial perspective?
So like I said, I went in, I had no idea what therapy looked like. I was just an advocate for it. I don't know. I just had blind faith, I guess. And so I was like, I think people need it. I've heard stories. And so actually in my dialogue with Esther, I told her, I was like, hey, can you actually recommend someone for me? I was like, I just want to try it. Because I was like, I recommend it to so many people, but I've never actually sat through a session. And I didn't have a need. I wasn't going through crisis or anything, but I was like, I should at least go through it so I know what I'm recommending to my people. And so I actually, she connected me with someone, and it was actually really helpful. And what I learned actually was one reflection that I have through the process is that as a pastor, it's very lonely. And you have a very select number of people that you can truly be yourself with or share with. And I realized that sometimes even that is not available to you, especially if someone shared something really heavy and you want to respect the confidentiality, but it's such a heavy burden. And when you carry it by yourself, it's so heavy, and yes, you can give it to Jesus, but sometimes it's really helpful just to have a human person acknowledge the heaviness, And so for me, it was really helpful. We went through a whole series of we just went through a season of a lot of unexpected deaths. And it was really hard. We lost a 2-year-old, just and this happened just as I was meeting with my therapist. I was like, oh God, maybe this was why. But just being able to share that with someone who's outside of your context and won't share that beyond it was it lifted the burden just to be able to share it with someone. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is why it's very helpful, at least on my end. And through our collaboration, and while I was talking with Esther, I started to really understand that therapy is a very long process. And I'm like many of you in here, I'm like a doer, let's just fix the problem. And as I've been talking with her, it's also me trying to educate the parents, the therapist isn't going to solve your problem in 2 sessions, And I've actually told the parents, and really the problem might be you. And so they were like, what? And so part of the reason why I actually invited them to come was it was my trickery. I was like, hey, come and find out what therapists do and what they're like so you can find out for your kids, but also hey, maybe you might want a session too. So that's kind of been something that I've learned. I was like, oh, it's a whole family process, and it's it takes time. And so just trying to also educate my families on that. Like, hey, it took a lot of time for this problem to develop. It's going to take a lot of time for it to resolve and find solutions. So that's actually been really helpful for me and my families.
Question again?
Oh, what have you gained as, in the collaboration as pastor?
Okay, gotcha. Gained. Well, first I would say, do you remember 2020 when Soup Plantation passed away and you would just disclose your whole medical record before you saw a friend? I have ADD. I was diagnosed with depression. I tore 3 ACLs. And so mental health was always a part of my personal journey. And I saw a therapist for 4.5 years. I studied psychology at UCI and thought about going to psychology. And so becoming a therapist. So there is already integration in me. And so it was pretty much an easy outflow of my own story and that integration into the church. I've prayed a lot for therapists to partner at Renew. And once upon a time, priests and therapists shared the same role before it was segmented. And I just see Roy, Sonia, and the many therapists that are at our church as an extension of ministry, the ministry of the church in ways that are multifaceted, like mental, spiritual, physiological. Like, how do we come around a person in all of those different ways?
I think my seat here on the panel is a little unique because I'm not a pastor, but as an executive director, I can speak to the importance of advocating for mental health for your leadership teams, especially your staff. I was having a conversation with our chair of the board, Gino, and he was saying, I asked him, Gino, what made you guys want to intentionally budget out our finances and reconfigure our finances so that 50% coverage can be possible for our staff to get mental health and for our premaritals and all that stuff. So, and he was saying, as employers of people who work in ministry and understanding the rigors and the weight of it, it's important. It was more important for us to invest in preventative care for our staff, rather than addressing things post. So post fallout, post burnout. We hear about this very often, especially in ministry. And I love that. I think that's very important. That was my biggest takeaway. There's so many takeaways and things that we've been blessed in from our relationship with our therapists. But that specifically in my role, where staff care and staff development is a priority, really and it's as cliche as it is top down, it really is. You need to have those conversations, and it can't just be from the senior pastor. It has to be kind of all across the board, elders, or whoever your leadership team is, and provide that preventative care and just overall wellness and talking about mental health to your staff and your leaders. Yeah.
I want to make sure they didn't miss that. So ECHO carves out in their budget therapy for all their staff as a regular thing, 50%, you said.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's regular. So all of them are going to therapy. So imagine what that will do to the culture.
We have been very blessed to have that as a gift for us. It also goes with physical health, mental health, right? I think we have some kind of stipend with a gym membership or something. I don't really use that, but it's there, I've heard. And so I love that it's so comprehensive. It's mental, physical, emotional, all of it. So that was, a big takeaway for us.
Thank you. Now I have a question for the clinicians here. I'm sure we've got students, clinical psych, MFT students here. We have people in private practice. I know each of you have your own private practices, group practices also, but what would you say are important skills you have and have developed in order to do this kind of church partnership? Because this is not your average, like, sit in a room with the client clinical skill. This is taking a lot of other types of skills. So yeah, that's for the therapist.
So I think clinicians become clinicians because there are certain like natural giftings, right? Like we are good listeners, we observe well, we can see the big picture, but also break it down for people. We slow things down. I think all those, and shepherding, it could be wisdom, guidance. So all of those skills can be helpful in this process of relating and connecting and identifying needs, coming up with a plan, activating, But I think what really stumps a lot of therapists is the commitment portion, because therapists, very much like pastors, we do have those Wednesdays. We have, I don't know if you guys remember the Wednesdays, the long Wednesdays, in a different form. Like who we sit with every hour is different. So at the end of the day, it's not we're not often left with the best of us. So to go beyond that, to exert more, and to want to commit to something and connect, because we know that the who is it? It's the delayed gratification, Jeanette. um, because we know that putting those hours in and connecting it's gonna go beyond what God is doing just through me in that hour with one person or one family, but it is creating partnerships that could, influence a greater community, and there's a greater healing impact. So I would say more than the skills that I know that all of us have and we're gifted with, it might be the willingness, availability, commitment, and consistent discipline of continuing to meet up and bridging. Yeah.
I think it's a theme of renew. What's the question?
Maybe I didn't answer the question, so it's confusing.
I'm just, yeah.
As a therapist, what skills do you feel are important?
Thank you. I feel like there's, how therapists are kind of known as wounded healers, and I definitely have my my wound story, and to be acquainted with it intricately, and to allow God to do some of the redemptive work in it, so that you now have some gospel story to tell in the way that you want to partner, with the church, is really important personally for me. In addition to doing some of the sex addiction work at our church, what's been profoundly significant in my life is my divorce story, and to be remarried and to have a family again is something that is it is unique to me, but there's significant overlap in people in the community who feel like church isn't a place for me to expose that part of my life. They feel like they are marginalized, whether the divorce happened as a result of their own mistakes or whether it kind of happened to them and they were victimized. So as I went through my own journey of wrestling and healing through that, my wife and I have had a lot of conversations about what it would look like to partner in ministry together as two remarried people. And because the national ministry called Divorce Care came to our radar, we both wanted to be involved in that ministry at whichever church that we would land at. We were actually rejected as we pitched that idea at a former church because they felt that it was the wrong optics. That because they didn't have a marriage ministry, you presenting a divorce care ministry is presenting the wrong optics, that oh, we're just encouraging everyone to divorce. Like, when did I ever say that, But so that was a real wounding as we were pitching that idea. But then when we came to Renew, we had conversations with Wilson and other folks that it's like, it's almost as if like as we talk about that idea, Wilson's like, here's my checkbook. When can you get started? What resources can we give to you? And so that couldn't have been possible if my wife and I both hadn't done some internal work in how we experienced divorce and how we experienced the redemption of finding one another and wrestling with God through all that. And so my encouragement to students and other maybe newer therapists is to consider your story to be a real big part of God's orchestration of like I don't know how to explain this. Like using you as a vessel, as an instrument of healing in the church. It can't be something that you feel like you are kind of distant from, but it's got to be something very personal to you, I think. And as you engage in that, the people that you're ministering to, they'll intuitively know that this is like a real thing for you, and it's very life-giving for them. And as we, as my wife and I talk with people who are either going through a divorce or who have been recently divorced or even like 15 years divorced, as we keep sharing our stories and our heart with them, like there's so much camaraderie that develops, and they can sense the love of God in the ways that we minister to them, and that the gospel is for them too. So yeah, that's my encouragement to those of you.
I think that well, for myself, I have about 6 years of ministry experience. So I served within a varsity for 3 years, and then I was also youth pastor at a Korean church for 3 years. So I think that's helpful. But I would actually say that for me, this isn't a skill, but I love Echo. I've never been, but I really believe that this is like a God-ordained calling partnership. Ooh, I didn't expect that. But when Echo has gone through difficulties, I have wept for Echo. I have prayed for Echo. So I really believe that I'm not just like a therapist. I really believe there's a partnership. So therapists, if you want to partner with a church, pray for it, and see how the Lord is like preparing you for perhaps this kind of God-ordained partnership where you can be such an active member in providing healing for an entire community. Where you're bringing healing to marriages and also bringing healing to like staff partnerships and to kiddos, and it's yeah. I think I just take it very seriously. Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Thank you to all of you. And Migum, along the lines of what you're sharing, and this is why I think we really wanted to highlight this kind of partnership. But do you hear the years of friendship and knowing of each other? And I think what's really special, and I was here, a lot of conversations today. The three therapists here, we've known each other a long time. Tricia, I've known since middle school. So we're all kind of like, I don't know if you could call us contemporaries. There are many generations represented in this room. Who are yours? What is your network, right? How can you dream of collaborations? And as I said at the start of today, this is not meant to be prescriptive. It's not meant to be like, you need to be a pastor, just like Pastor Wilson, like to get enough strength to have that kind of vulnerability. No, this is simply one example of how one community is making this work for them, right? And so think about your context. what from this can we glean, right? And what is helpful and what do we keep imagining together? But the heart here is, this is where it's a challenge. And this is speaking to the therapist here. There's a lot of tensions, right? Especially like you're an intern, trying to get hours, you get paid peanuts, and then you like have a private practice and you're like, I have to ask for money from someone. How am I supposed to ask for $150? And now the going rate is like 200s average. Like, it's a lot. Money is a hard thing. We're not having an explicit conversation here about it, but I'm sure people are wondering, right? This is moving into consultation work. Roy is in his church community. This is a different dynamic. But Esther and Migum are external to this church community. And so is there something that one of the therapists, or even like in your collaborative way, to talk about how do you work through the financial agreement? Because that's a real thing, right? It's important, I will say, in your expertise as a therapist, if you're organizational psychologist, you know these things, do not give your work away for free, right? It's one thing to intentionally choose to do it as ministry, but even then, you need to have clarity around what that looks like, because this is a matter of mutual well-being. So I want to just open that question for anyone in terms of like the financial piece.
For the premarital program at Echo, it's 5 sessions. If you want to be married by one of the pastors at Echo, then you have to go through this program. 5 sessions of therapy, $100 each. So it's a $500 commitment. The couple pays $250, Echo pays $250. So on the therapist side, it is $100 a session. And that's part of our way of seeing it as a ministry. After those 5 sessions are over, we have a conversation about what the couple can afford.
I paid Roy till he came to my church, and now I'm sorry. We try to platform some of the curriculum he's done. Free advertising.
So worth it.
I think what Jess is pointing to is something that I know is a struggle for a lot of therapists. And having associates in my group too, I think the financial portion has always been a challenge when associates are trained to ask for payment for the work that they have done. Because a lot of the therapists in this room come from ministry background. They're either missionaries or they're PKs or have been serving in youth ministry and transitioning into paid ministry-ish work, So there's that confusion. And I have to say, I think earlier on when I started consulting work for churches and organizations, there was no payment because I think as an Asian American woman, kind of speaking into like sex abuse cases and different things, there was no setup for financial support. It was just you were called in for triaging situations, and we do what we can. And it's a great partnership because we know we have a shared goal to heal the community. So we do the work together. I think a lot of us are doers here. So we could engage in the work and not really think about the financial well-being, financial health portion. I think historically too, like it's been easier for me to advocate for my associates or my colleagues' payment because it is kind of, like you're helping and you're doing it for somebody. Tricia actually has been offering to pay like through News Story. It's been a conversation we've tabled and we will get to it. But I think the thing I appreciated about this too is that I wasn't the one going into a church setting to set up their financial program for mental health support, which is what I often do for the associates or colleagues that I'm referring them to. But she kind of came up and said, hey, I need to pay you guys for this. Like, do you guys have a thing? And I don't think I've ever done it for for us. So I was like, oh, that's kind of strange. So I think that's going to be something that we're going to be growing from. But thank you for bringing this up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so sorry.
You didn't email that question to him.
I I didn't. But everyone is honest and open to conversation. And each of these dyads is what's the word? Paving uncharted territory, right? So it's really significant that the sort of brainstorming collaboration that has happened here. I hope that it's inspiring you to think about ways that you can be doing this with your church systems, with your group practices. So let's say thank you for their time and their sharing.